Facing overbets can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. Making fear-based plays costs you money. In this video, I'll break down how you should respond to an overbet on the flop, turn, and river. I hate to start a video with nerdy maths, but I promise it won't be too complicated. Let's talk about the basic framework. If someone bets 125% pop, you need 35.7% equity to make that call. When someone bets 150% pop, 37.5% equity is required to break even. Or if someone bets 200% pop, 40% equity is required to break even. What this actually means is you don't just need the nuts or close to the nuts to continue against this sizing. What you need is a hand that has enough equity, but also crucially can realize enough equity on the flop and the turn. On the river, it's a very simple calculation. If someone bets 2x pot all in on the river, you need 40% equity against their range to make calling more profitable than folding. Simple as that. Let's talk about facing a flop overbet first. So these are the sort of hands you want to always continue. Let's say if you're in the big blind and the button is overbetting as a c-bet into you. Hands to always continue include combo and nutted draws. If you've got a gut shot and a flush draw, if you've got the nut flush draw, if you've got two overs and a flush draw, these are all generally going to be hands that are strong enough to continue. Pairs and redraws. If you've got a pair and a gut shot, pair and open ender, pair and a flush draw, again, these are going to be hands that are just not foldable on the flop, no matter really what the bet sizing is. Finally, sets and two pairs, of course, always continuing. Top pairs, nearly always. There are a few situations where we actually start folding some top pairs, but in general, I wouldn't advise folding top pair, even against the overbets, from a theoretical perspective. We take an example, I've got an ace jack 4 here, and we see that hands such as ace 8, hands like queen 10 of spades for that combo draw, hands like king jack, which is the mid pair, backdoor gut shot and a backdoor flush draw, or a hand like 2-5, the classic combo draw here. These are hands that have a green tick that you should always be continuing. So don't fold these hands against the overbets, please. Now let's get into that more murky situation. These are going to be hands that you should sometimes continue. Basically, will be mixed strategies in theoretical poker. Firstly, let's talk about middle pairs with backdoor equity. Think about hands which have maybe a backdoor straight draw, hands that have a backdoor flush draw. These are typically going to be hands that you can continue. Strong flush draws. So not the nut flush draws, not two overs or a combo draw or a pair and a flush draw. But let's say, for example, you have a queen high or a jack high flush draw without real extra redraws. Those aren't going to be snap calls in theory. And then finally, some open-ended straight draws with overcards. Open-ended straight draws in general, you're going to want to continue. Some of the open-enders where they're sort of the bottom end, you may want to fold. In general, open-enders that are drawing to the nuts and have some additional outs, you're generally going to want to continue, but none of these hands are going to be super close either way. If we keep with our ace jack 4 example, we've got 10-8 of spades here, for example, generally going to be a continue. King 10 with the 10 of spades is going to be close, probably a mix here. 4-5, again, going to be close. You have got the backdoor straight draw, you have got the backdoor flush draw, but it's not a very strong backdoor flush draw, and therefore it's something you have to be careful about. And then the jack 8, again, jack 8 with the spade is just about enough equities to continue, but again, it's not a very high backdoor flush draw. And again, these are all big blind versus button situations, 100 big blinds. Now let's talk about the type of hands you should really be folding to those flop overbets. In general, high cards without any extra equity are just going to be folds. Yes, against smaller bets, you can call that king high with a backdoor, you can call that queen high with maybe a backdoor straight draw or some overs, but against the big bets, unfortunately, it's just time to let go of these hands. In addition, weak draws without showdown value. If you're lucky enough to flop the gut shot, unfortunately, against this sort of sizing, you're very unlikely to be able to properly VPIP this hand, and it's just time to fold that as well. Finally, and I think this is an important one, second or third pairs without backdoors or overcard kickers. Again, let's take our ace jack 4. We see this king 9 of hearts here. I think this is a hand that most people continue against a small bet, but against the overbet, just time to muck it. King 10 is a gut shot. You think it's pretty nice. Even though we're drawn to the nuts, just not enough equity to have this be a call in theory. And then we move on to some of the pairs. This 7-4, probably quite a reasonable fold. Most people are making that 7-4 on the bottom end, but that jack 7-2, it seems like quite a strong hand. You feel like you're quite up in your range, but against that overbet, you just want to be folding that hand without the redraws to be playing theoretical poker. But now that we've established those hands that we want to call, that we sometimes call, we sometimes fold, we can use Lucid to actually test it. What I've done is I've created a Lucid drill here. I've set it up so we're in the big blind, facing the button and facing this overbet. Now what we can do is we can use the Lucid drill here and use those rules that we just planned for. And let's see, by following those rules, how many EV errors are we going to make in this big blind versus button spot facing only overbets. So ace jack here, I actually would lean towards folding this against the overbet, would be correct. This jack 6 of diamonds, close, but has got the backdoor straight draw to go with a flush draw, I'm going to make the call. I wouldn't be surprised if this is sometimes folding. Top pair, we generally don't fold top pair against overbets. Easy call. Again, top pair, easy continue. Not always a call for what it's worth, but one of those spots where I said you're unlikely to make an EV error. Easy continue here. Easy continue. King queen here. It will be a call. We've got the backdoor straight draw working for us. We've got the backdoor flush draw working for us. There will be some queen x we'd fold definitely on this board. King queen won't be one of them. 6-3, easy fold. 6-4, easy call. Ace-10, easy call. You can just carry on, and drilling is a great way to reinforce those heuristics, those plans, really reinforce those thresholds about which hands you should continue against which sizings, and building that theoretical knowledge. Okay, so that's the flop covered. Now let's talk about the turn. This is where a lot of the population typically uses the overbet more frequently these days in your games. So let's talk about what we should continue. And I think there's a couple of surprising hands here. Firstly, obviously we're continuing with all of our strongest hands, our sets, our two pairs, and these strong top pairs. I will emphasize strong top pairs. We'll get to that later. Secondly, strong draws with 8+ outs. In general, you're going to want strong draws to continue against this. It's not going to be just calling every single straight draw, every single flush draw, every single gut shot. It's going to be the best of the best. You're going to want to have a little bit of additional playability to it. Either have some good implied odds or have some extra additional outs. If you, for example, have a straight draw and an over, or if you have a pair to go over your draw, again, those are going to make it much more playable than simply calling open-enders without that additional equity. 10-second interruption just to let you know that Lucid Poker is now totally free. You can head over to lucidpoker.com and try out the base version for absolutely free. Get better at poker now. Now let's talk about hands that are theoretically close when your opponent overbets on the turn. Don't forget, because these are theoretically close, if you suspect your opponent is tighter or looser, these will be hands that you can adjust. You can fold them more, you can call them more, but again, these are going to be in the mixed sort of hand strength class. Now, mid-strength draws, we already talked about the draws. If you've got a mid-strength draw, it's going to be that mixed strategy, can go a bit either way. Weak top pairs. I think this is where a lot of you might struggle. If you have an ace, it's very difficult to fold it ever on a turn, especially when that turn doesn't seem to bring any additional scare cards. But often top pairs are just bluff catching here and haven't got a big buffer in terms of their EV advantage when facing the 150% pot bet on the turn. Finally, middle and bottom pairs with overs and redraws. In general, we're folding middle and bottom pairs on the turn, but if they come with redraws or if they have over cards, those are sometimes the hands that you want to be calling. Let's take this ace-7-2-8 board. This is a board that will often be overbet on the turn. We take a hand like ace-10, something as strong as ace-10, and this is a mixed frequency defend. So if you're playing an opponent that you think is a little bit too tight and is under bluffing slightly when they overbet the turn, ace-10 probably moves from being a break-even call to just a losing call. We also look at hands like 6-5, that should be a fold even though it's an open-ender. 10-9 in the example before we saw was always calling, 6-5 in this case is nearly always folding. Ace-4 again just to reinforce that top pair, even without the blockers, still folding. And finally, Queen-Jack. Queen-Jack is a very strong hand here, and you have improved to hit a flush draw, and yet you call flop against a small bet, and then as soon as they go for that 150% bet, you should now be folding Queen-Jack. I think something that's psychologically quite hard to do since you've improved, but is correct in theoretical play. Now let's talk about the kind of hands you should always fold on the turn. So generally weak-made hands without improvement. If you've got second pair, third pair, these are nearly always going to be folds in theoretical play. Weak draws with poor implied odds. If you've got a gut shot, if you've got a weak straight draw, these are hands that are going to be folds nearly always. And finally, hands that are dominated by opponent's likely range. But depending on the situation, sometimes the outs that you'll have in the hand won't actually amount for too much. You may have a straight draw, but there's a flush draw out there and the straight draw is not worth as much. Now again, we'll take our ace-7-2-8 board and we see a gut shot here, jack-10, even though it's got two overs, just pure folding. 8-5 second pair, again, you've called flop, you've hit the turn, you're just now pure folding. Jack-7, a pure fold, and Queen-Jack of clubs. Get out of there, don't mess about, fold, save your chips. What we've got here is we've got a turn drill. So we've done exactly the same on the flop. We've set up the same for the turn. Great thing about Lucid, very customizable. And again, we can run through 10 examples and we can use those rules and heuristics that we developed. And let's see how well we do. Now here we have Queen-7. I think this is close. We talked a bit before about top pair not always being a continue. My guess is going to be a mix. Let's say 50-50. I don't know exactly, but just a pure call. Tomo doesn't know what he's talking about sometimes. Queen-4 here. Close. We didn't talk about paired boards so much. I think this will be a call. Ace-5, it's going to be a continue. You have the nut flush draw to go with your pair. wouldn't be a hand we should be folding. King 10, straight draw, but there is a flush draw out there. However, we are drawn to somewhat to the nuts, and we do have an over. So I think we would probably be folding 10-9 here, but I'm not sure about King 10. I think I'm going to make the call. It's close. What would you at home? Let us know in the comments maybe before I press call. The mix. We're in the right ballpark. Seems like we've got our thresholds good here. This will be a fold. Bluffed us, but not really. I think we should fold this. We do fold this. Nice hand. This King 10 of clubs. Pretty good draw. Again, something you might just think, yeah, I must always call here. It is close and there is a paired board. I will make the call, but I do think we'd probably fold some flush draws here. I think this might be close. Not that close. Who knows? Ace 10, I think this is too strong to let go. Might be a board with like ace 6, ace 5, ace 7, stuff like that. I think ace 10 is just going to be too much of a call. It is close. We are sometimes folding ace 10 there. Pocket 3's easy fold. And last hand, ace jack. We are drawn to the nuts. We have got an over. We are live against 2 pair. I think it's close. I think we should make the call. Good. Once again, a perfect run on the drills. And this is the great thing. You can try this at home, set yourself up in all different kinds of bet sizings, build that threshold. So we've done the flop, we've done the turn. Let's take it to the river. So here we are on the river facing a river overbet. Now, one thing we should mention when we face a river overbet is the equities are set. As we mentioned in the math section, there's no more cards to come. The equities are set. It's purely a decision. Does a hand have enough equity against our opponent's range? Blockers start becoming very relevant in equilibrium play, and we'll try and talk through a couple of examples there. Now, this is going to be incredibly board specific, so it's very hard to give generic advice because of the range of runs that can come. But in general, you should be always concluding your nutted hands, or I would say the near nuts. It's very rare that you'll have like the second or third or fourth nuts and fold it even to a 2x pot. There can be a couple of examples where, I don't know, for example, on a 4 flush board, where there's so many combinations of the nuts that second nuts may just be bluff catching. But in general, if you've got a very, very strong hand, folding is unlikely to be the correct play, in theoretical play at least. When we talk about hands that sometimes continue, it's going to be pairs that block value in unblocked bluffs. So a great strategy in rivers is to figure out what you think your opponent's value threshold is. Anything above that value threshold, we typically just call, and we're happy with that. Once we fall below that value threshold, this is where blockers start becoming very relevant in theoretical play. With the overbets, the difficulty can be is that sometimes your 2 pair or your top pairs can still be bluff catching, and therefore you want to call them at a similar ratio perhaps to weaker hands, but be more blocker dependent. Now, holding 2 pair or holding top pair is in general pretty good in terms of they have good blocker effects. It's hard if your opponent have 2 pair when you have 2 pair. It's hard if your opponent have a good hand if you have top pair. But sometimes you should be actively folding these very frequently, and other times you should be calling them very liberally. It's very situational, and so try your best to think about the board and your opponent in terms of what's happening there. In terms of generally folding, as we mentioned, any non-top end hand that unblocks value and blocks bluffs is going to be a pretty good candidate to fold. If you hold 2 pair on some runouts, even if you hold a set but the board's rolled out with a straight or has a flush, you want to be very cautious about overcalling those spots. It's going to be very blocker dependent. It's going to be very specific. All that you can do is try your best. In general, we're not looking to call no-made hands. You don't need to call a massively wide range, but you can filter your hands through a little bit and then focus especially on that value threshold. Once you can establish accurately where your opponent's value range starts, that gives you a great barometer that you should call with everything above that line, and everything below that line should be a bluff catch and should treat with caution. Okay, let's do our hardest challenge today. This is going to be the river calls. So again, these are going to be button versus big blind facing a small C bet, a 3/4 turn, and now an overbet on the river. And so we're going to have a lot of interesting, difficult challenges. Queen Jack is going to be comfortably below our opponent's value threshold range, but has got pretty good blockers. Blocking Queen 10 is somewhat relevant. Blocking hands like King Jack, Jack 9, Jack 8, somewhat relevant. I think this will be a hand that wouldn't be a bad hero calling hand. If you think about the rest of our range, seems pretty decent to me. I think this would be not a bad hero calling spot. I think it'll be close. Pretty good call. He has got Queen 10, so we should have folded maybe, but blockers mean nothing. Now, I will be very pleased with myself if I can get 10 of 10 here. 7-5, this strikes me as being just a pure fold. I think the 7 is pretty bad. On the button, pretty good candidates to bet. As bluffs would be hands like 7-8, 7-6. So I think this has bad blocker impacts in terms of blocking some bluffs. We don't unblock any value. I think we should fold. Good fold. Here we have another spot where we've been overbet. This would be quite a common overbetting spot with the ace of diamonds and the king of spades rolling off. And again, we're obviously bluff catching in this spot situation. Again, think about our blockers. Do we block any value here? a little bit, but we have far better candidates to choose from. Having a jack, having a 10 is going to block the straights. Having a king or an ace would be better. I think we're pretty uncapped in terms of having some jack 10 as well. I think the 6 is pretty bad for us. I think we can happily fold. Wish us luck. Upset. In this case, we have the nut, so I think we should raise. Sometimes the drills give you an easy one. Let's raise here. I'm confident this is correct, this one. Hey, we got one right. And another one. Let's raise this full house. Lovely. Let's just do 5. Again, great ways to develop that thresher, great ways to develop that strategy. And practicing those blocker impacts with these river drills can be really, really useful to really establish that baseline. But then you can have a good understanding of how you can deviate in game against certain opponents. You pick up reads or you pick up tendencies to know which are the kind of hands that you should never fold in theory versus which are hands that will be a mixture. And that's great to be able to use that as an exploit. If you've been enjoying our sort of content from Lucid, please feel free to Overbet, jam into that like and subscribe button. We're uploading free strategy content every week to help you stop leaving money at the poker tables. Now, finally, let's talk about when you should actually be terrified facing an overbet, because it's all well and good knowing what theory should be doing, and it is quite useful given that a lot of people that use that overbet will be regs, but at the same time, there will be some super tight players who underbluff, and those are guys you do not want to be calling. You think about all of those mixed hands we saw on the flop and the turn and the river, all of those will be just awful calls against someone that is under bluffing. All of those top pairs that were marginal, all of those second pairs that were marginal, we can just fold them with confidence against someone who's under bluffing and make a lot more money that way. In multi-way pots as well, a lot of people play low live stakes. We're playing an awful lot of multi-way pots post-flop. And in general, the math rarely works for bluffing in multi-way pots. And so it's something that you want to be careful. You don't see too much in theory, and in general, given the extra additional players out there that are willing to defend, I would encourage you to proceed with a lot of caution, facing overbets if it's 3-way, 4-way, or 5-way, for example. In those situations, if you're playing a bomb pot, for example, and you face an overbet on the turn from a recreational or from a tight reg, you may be a bit more in nut peddling land where you may just want to continue with the nuts in those situations. Another situation which should probably terrify you would be in the non-theoretical overbet spots. Important example here, this is a 6-5-2-4 button versus big blind. We really don't see overbetting happening almost at all on this kind of turn. You play an opponent that does overbet this turn, you have to be very cautious about it. As the big blind, we have a lot more 3x and we have a lot more straights in this kind of board, and we're also uncapped to have 7-8, for example, 7-3 suited perhaps, 4-3, 5-3, 6-3, and so we have lots of strong hands. The fact that your opponent is willing to make the big overbet on the board where we're pretty uncapped in our range should set alarm bells ringing, and we should proceed with extreme caution against players who at least aren't maniacs in this situation. Because of the amount of strong hands that you'll have here, you don't need to try and add extra hands to defend super wide here. And finally, even if you're playing regs, but those regs have shown 0 balance, again, maybe you played a reg and they've shown up 5 out of 5 times with the overbet with value. And please let us know, by the way, in the comments if you'd like to see a video on when should you overbet. But it's very easy to construct your value with overbets, and a lot of people struggle to find the right sort of bluffs. Because of this, there's certainly subsections of the population that play poker that are too value centric when they overbet. And so all of those hands that we talked about in the mixed sometimes play categories in the flop and the turn and the river, these are hands that probably read this. You may want to err on the side of caution if you're playing in your local game and you haven't got a reason to suspect that your opponent's going to be balanced. Once you have that balance established, once you've seen them capable of bluffing, now at least you have a good benchmark in terms of you know the kind of hands you should play, you know the hands you should always play, and you know the hands you should always fold on the flop, turn, and river. What a fantastic knowledge base you've just developed there facing an overbet. If you enjoyed learning about overbets and you'd like to maybe practice yourself a little bit more, professional team of Cardle quiz writers have synced up, and we've got a lovely overbetting quiz and facing overbetting quiz coming for you in the Cardles this Saturday, hopefully. So check out Cardles on Lucid if you'd like to practice yourself with some specially made quizzes on this topic. Hopefully you got some value from this and you now have greater confidence in facing an overbet, be it on the flop, turn, river. If you'd like to stay a little bit longer and take a look at some of the deadly mistakes that you might be making in 3-bet pots, why not give this video here a watch? I want to say here. Thanks very much. Just there.